We're on the first line of 91A, and we're discussing a number of rules about commerce, and we'll get to a lot of Agadah today. Tana Rabbanan, 91A. Ein mistakrin pamayim bebetzim. You can't take profit twice on eggs. What does this mean? Amar Mari Bar Mari. Pliga Rav Shmuel. Rav Shmuel have different opinions on what this means. Chalamar al chad trey means you can't charge double the price. Like you can't mark up the price from $1 to $2. Now, this seems a little unlikely because we already have a 1/6 rule for Ona. So there are a number of possible explanations for this. So for example, the 1/6 limit might apply only to staples, but eggs are not considered a staple. But that wasn't my impression of the rules of Ona. Anyway, it's unclear why eggs would be in particular subject to a limit of doubling the price to be a problem. But the other opinion is tagra tagra. You can't have a long distribution chain. You can buy from a producer and sell to the consumer, but you should not have another middleman in the way. Okay, so that's what it means. Like there can't be more than two steps to the producer. Tanrabanan, rabbis taught, Masrin al Pragmatia, Shahuzla. It's appropriate to cry out in prayer because of a serious drop in prices. Okay, if the bottom falls out of the economy in some way such that the price of everything really goes down, now that's great for the consumer, but it's not good for the economy in general. It's not good for the producers. They're not going to make a living. But Shabbos, and even Shabbos, when it's usually prohibited to cry out for things that are a problem in the community, this kind of thing is an exception. What does this apply to? For example, the price of flax linen clothes in Bavel, v'yayin v'shem beretz Yisrael, and wine and oil in Israel, because these are staples of the economy. And a lot of people make their living from it. If the price drops too much, then you have a problem for those people in that industry. That's only if, what does it mean? The price drops when it drops from by 40%, from $10 to $6. Anything greater or 40% or greater of a price drop in these important goods to the economy is a problem, and it's considered a community problem. You can't leave Israel for Chutz La'aretz, Elim Kain Amdu Sasayim B'Sela, unless the economy is so bad that 2 saw of wheat cost a sela. Rabbi Shimon, Emosai, when is it the case that you can leave Eretz Yisrael because of this economic hardship? Is man she'eino motzi likach, if you can't even find wheat to buy. Well, is man she'eino motzi likach, but if you can find it, if it's available to buy, but it's expensive. Even if 1 saw costs a sela, you still can't leave Eretz Yisrael. It's unclear if the Gemara means it's available, but if it's available and you can't afford it, then what? It could mean, but it doesn't seem to be saying that. It would make more sense to say that, look, if you can't buy food because you have, because you're too, but then if that were the case, then what would it mean that, in general, if prices stay the same, but you have no money, does that mean you can leave Eretz Yisrael? I mean, maybe you can, but that's not what the Gemara is addressing here. So it's very unclear if it means that it becomes too expensive for you, or it becomes too expensive objectively, even if you have resources. But perhaps we can get some insight into this by what the Gemara is going to say next. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said, Elimelech, Machlon, v'Chilion. These are the characters in the book of Ruth, right? Ruth's father-in-law was Elimelech, and she married, I can't remember which one of the brothers, Machlon or Kilion, and her sister, and Orpah, who became her sister-in-law, married the other brother. Who were these people? They left Israel for Moab. Gedoli Hadar Hayu, Parnasei Hadar Hayu. They were prominent members of the community in Israel, and in fact, they were philanthropists. Why did they get punished? Because they moved to Moab. When Naomi came back after the death of her husband and sons. It says the whole city, when she returned, was in a tumult. About them saying about Tamarna, and they said, Hazos Naomi, is this Naomi, right? My Hazos Naomi, they knew it was Naomi. What does it mean, is this Naomi? Rabbi Yitzchak says what they're saying is, and this is, I think, the pshat in the pasuk, Chazisem Naomi sheyatzos me'eretz l'chutzlaretz. Have you seen this Naomi who left Israel for Moab? Ma'al look what happened to her, right? It was like, this lesson was coming to life before their eyes. So it was certainly the topic of conversation. Now, from this story in the Gemara, it seems like Elimelech had plenty of resources, right? But things were very expensive, and he wanted to live somewhere where he could live more cheaply, or perhaps the implication that he was a parnas hadar, he was a philanthropist, like maybe the demands on him were becoming too great. But whatever, he could afford to buy the food, but he left because of the economic situation. So that seems to be, according to that seems to be what the Gemara is getting at, where at some point the economics become so bad that if you feel like you need to leave, then you can leave. But apparently that didn't apply to Elimelech. Maybe the situation was not as bad as would be warranted. Rabbi Yitzchak continues. Also, Hayom Shabbos Ruth Hamoavi Israel. That day that Ruth came to Israel, Mesa Ishel Shabbos, Boaz's wife, and Boaz was the one who ultimately married Ruth and was the progenitor of the Davidic line. So the day that Ruth came to Israel, Boaz's wife died, rendering him, a bachelor again, or a widower, I should say, and putting him in a position where he would be interested in remarrying, and Ruth shows up. Behind Damri, that's what people say. Before someone dies, Kaimo Manu Baise, his replacement, the head of his future head of his household after he dies, is already prepared for him. Amar Rabbi Baruch Hu, Ivtzan's a Boaz. Ivtzan is one of the Shoftim, one of the little-known Shoftim in the book of Shoftim. That's Boaz, the same person. Micah Mashal, the Gemara says, so what? What are you telling us? Very nice, but do I care? Ki idach de Rabbi Baruch Hu. It's like the statement of Rabbah, Diam Rabbi Huna, Amarav, Mea v'yesri mishtos asa Boaz above. Boaz made 120 wedding parties. Shenamar, Vayila shloshim banim shloshim banos shilach achutza. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters who he sent out, meaning he sent out to get married. And he brought 30 women for his sons to marry. So he had basically 60 children to make weddings for. He was a shofet for 7 years. For each of his children, he made 2 parties. One in his own house, in the house of the child's father, and one in the house of the father-in-law. So he made all these wedding parties, and he never invited Manoach. Who's Manoach? Manoach is the father of Shimshon. You'll recall that Manoach and his wife were childless until the angel appeared and gave them the news that they would have a son and he should be a Nazir, etc. And that was Shimshon. But until that happened, he was considered childless.
Now it says
And
here that Boaz, right? He says Shloshim banot shilach achutza. So he sent his 30 daughters outside of the land of Israel. Isn't that a little
in
odd
the
here?
context, it seems to me it means he sent them out of his house. In other words, to get married. I mean, I could see why you would translate it that way. We've just been talking about huslars, but that's not the focus here. The focus here is of these
Yeah,
of making weddings. So
right.
the way I understand it is he sent out to get married.
Okay,
And then
but
the counterpart is hey, and he brought in women. Hevi levanav min hachutz. He brought in from outside. Seems to me to mean from outside the family, women for his sons to marry. Although you could interpret it, women from Chutzlars, but that doesn't seem to be relevant. Where they came from in this
in the
particular
context, I
story.
understand that. But
Yeah,
and then I thought, what if that's we were saying chutza before chutza?
yeah, yeah. I
It's just
understand.
I just thought about that. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a little unclear, maybe deliberately so. I don't know. But yeah, but the simple way to understand it is outside the family. So anyway, he didn't invite Manoach to any of these weddings. Amar, he said, "Kudna akara b'may parli." Like this sterile donkey, right? Like he's not going to be able to invite me back. He's not having any children. He's not making any weddings, right? Why should I invite him? He's not going to invite me back. Um, so that's clearly a rather churlish kind of attitude. Tana b'chula mesu b'chayev, and guess what? All those children died in Ibsan's lifetime. B'chayach the yaladet shisin, even if you have 60 children, shisin lamalech. Like, what good is that to you if they die? Ichpal v'olid chad, keep going and have one more child. The mishisin zaris, um, who will be more. I don't know, zaris. Here it translates more accomplished than all the other 60, meaning Boaz's son was,
Obed, right? Was it Obed?
oh yeah, Oved, and then his great grandson was David, right? So, that was a lasting thing. Um, okay, and so why do this idea that Ivsan is Boaz, like Ivsan is the one who is tagged with, one second, Boaz. Um, So what's interesting here is this medrash doesn't refer to Ifsan; it refers to Boaz. So, like, um, okay, sorry, I'm sorry. The thing about the 30 sons and 30 daughters was Ifsan. So identifying him with Boaz is like teaching this lesson that even if your 60 children, don't make anything of themselves, if you want to put it more colloquially, or if they die, it's still carry on and have another one. Maybe that one will have lasting impact. Okay. Amar Chanan Barav Amarav, Chanan said, Elimelech, Salmon, Uploni, Almoni, Avi Naomi, all these characters, Elimelech, who we referred to already, the father or the husband of Naomi, and Salmon, the father of Boaz, Uploni Almoni, the anonymous person who rejected Ruth, Vavi Naomi, and the father of Naomi. Kulam ben Nachshon ben Aminadav. They were all descendants of Nachshon ben Aminadav, the Nasi of Shevet Yehuda, about whom the Medrash says he jumped first into the Yam Suf before it split. My Kamashmalan. So, like, what's the lesson behind this? Shafilu misheyesh lo chusavos. Even someone who has chusavos, who has merit among their ancestors. Once you leave, if you leave Eretz Yisrael, that chusavos doesn't help you. So I'm not sure, like Salmon, why he's tagged with this. But Elimelech left and he died. Ploni Almoni, he didn't leave Eretz Yisrael, so I'm not sure what that means. Avi Naomi is like Naomi's father, so Naomi herself left Eretz Yisrael, so she suffered. It's very unclear to me, like why Salmon and Ploni Almoni are included in this in this lesson here. Um, because as far as I know, they are never identified as having left Eretz Yisrael. But the other two were. So the lesson is that you leave Eretz Yisrael, then you give up the advantage of having schusavos. Gamar of Chanah bar Avram, Ime de Avram, the mother of Abraham, Amaslai bas Karnava. That's her name, Amaslai, daughter of Karnava. And Ime de Haman, the mother of Haman, had the same name, Amaslai bas Urvase. She was Amaslai, daughter of Urvase. And how do you remember which was which? Um, Tame, tame, tahar, tahar, because Urvase reminds us of Orev, a bird which is not kosher, and that's Haman's grandmother. Um, and Carnival reminds us of Karim is like flocks of fat sheep. Those are kosher animals. That's the grandmother. Sounds like the grandmother of Avraham. Ime de David, Nitzevas Basadar Shema. Since we're talking about mothers named, the mother of David was called Nitzevas, daughter of Adal. Ime de Shimshon, Tzelel Ponis. That was her name. Va'achse Nachshan, and Shimshon's sister was Nachshan. Now, interesting that Shimshon had a sister because, as we mentioned before, um, before Shimshon's birth, they were considered child. They seemed to be sterile, and only through the intervention of the angel or whatever of God did she have Shimshon. So, but we didn't hear anything about Shimshon having a sister, right? But you do sometimes hear about people who are childless for a long time, and they have a child, and then they have another child. That's something gets knocked loose, and they're no longer sterile. Anyway, why do we need to know the names of all these women? The Chuvas Haminim, to give answers to the heretics. So heretics might say, "Oh, you have all these bubamaises, these fairy tales about people in the Bible." But why aren't their names given? Must be that they're made up. And so the answer is no, we know their names. Okay, it doesn't sound like a great answer to me, but okay. Rav Chanan also says, Esther Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu was put in prison for 10 years. Shalosh Bakusa Vesheva Bakardu. 3 years in this place called Kusa and 7 in Kardu. Avram was presumably because he was viewed with disfavor by Nimrod, who, according to the Medrash, was the king in Ur Kasdim, where Avram was born. Rav Dimi Minardai Masnei Rav Dimi says no, it was the other way around. It was 7 years in Kusa and 3 years in Kardu. Amrav Chizda, Ibra Zeira de Kusa, Zeur Kasdim. The like the principality of
The small place.
yeah, Ivra Zira de Kusa. This place called Ivra Zira in the, I guess, province of Kusa. Zeur Kasdim. That's the same as Ur Kasdim, where Avram was born or lived before he migrated. So again, these are all like, okay, it's like great. These are the names. It doesn't really tell us a whole lot, but at least we have a name. Also, Yom Shaniftar Avram Avinu Yom, the day of Avram's death. Amdu Kol Gedolium Sa'olim Beshura. All of the officials of all the nations stood in a line. V'amru Ayloi la'olam she'avad manhigo. Go to the world that lost its leader. V'ayloi l'sfina she'avad kabarnita. And woe to the ship that lost its captain. V'hamisnasi l'chol harosh. These are all like little snippets of what is, probably part of a, more of a longer and more intricate narrative about the life of Avram Avinu. These seem to be like snippets of them. V'hamisnasi l'chol harosh. The Torah says you have leadership, sovereignty over every rosh, over every leader. Amrav Chanam Barav Amarav. Afilu Reish Gargusa Mishmaya Mokmile. This tells us that every position of leadership is appointed by God. Like even the guy in charge of the rose garden, He's that his leadership in that area is determined by God. Amar Chia bar Avin Amar Rishu ben Karcha. Chas v'shalom shafilu matzesubin lo yatsu. Going back to Elimelech and his sons leaving Eretz Yisrael, he says, "What are you talking about? Even had they even found bran to buy, they wouldn't have left. So, like, they were justified in leaving. There was really no food to be had. They had the opportunity to leave where they wouldn't starve, so they left. That's not so bad. Why were they punished? They did not beg God for mercy, right, for the whole generation. They saved themselves and they without concern for their their brothers. Shanamar bezakech yatziluch kibutzayich. As it says, when you cry out, then being gathered together, being in solidarity with others will rescue you. Amar Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Lo shalom elamos bezol Paris biyoker. Okay, this rule that you can't leave Eretz Yisrael until the prices become so high. That's if money is if money is available, but the food is expensive. Of almost biyoker, but if the money supply is tight, if people don't have money. Afilo amdu arba sayin b'sala yotzin. Even if the prices are cheap, if you have no money, if people have no money, then they can leave. Um, which is what I was referring to before. It's like a little unclear what's the relationship between availability of goods and price of goods and how much money you have. So so this memra by Rabbi Barbachana says that really what it depends on is if you have money. So if you have money and things are expensive, then you have no excuse to leave Eretz Yisrael. But if things are if things are well, even if things are cheap, but you have no money, then yeah, that's a good reason to leave also because you can't buy food.
The Gemara elsewhere, I'm not sure where it is. It might have been Sanhedrin, maybe, that there's a few reasons why it's permitted to leave Eretz Israel. One to get married, one to earn a living, and there are a couple more, I think.
Yeah, so this kind of fits in with the earning a living, or to avoid starvation. I mean, look, the Masayel was similar Labanim, if you like. Why did Avram and Yitzchak leave Eretz Yisrael? Because there was a famine, right? Sure, they were told to by God,
No,
but
Yitzchak didn't leave, I think. Yitzchak was the one who didn't.
yeah, well,
Yaakov
he
left.
went to Gerar, so is that really Eretz Yisrael or not? Yeah, it's a good point. Um,
Yaakov left, though.
Yaakov left, but he was in fear of his life. He didn't leave because of famine,
No, there was a
right?
famine. He went down to Egypt. There was a famine.
Oh, when he left for Egypt. Yes, yes, that's correct. Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was thinking of the first time he left. Yes, you're right. Um, and notice, by the way, that the Gemara is not talking here about. I may have elided this over this difference, but the Gemara is not talking here about if you personally, are poor, you personally don't have money. That's one thing, but it's talking about in general. If there is no money, right? If like, you can. I mean, people do this all the time. You rely on community support, right? On charity or whatever. If there are philanthropists that can support you then it's not an ideal situation, but that's an opportunity for you to stay in Eretz Yisrael. So it's not your personal bank account; it's in general are resources available to support the indigent or the people who need help. Um, and that goes back to Elimelech. Elimelech was one of those people who was a philanthropist. So that all is part of this whole calculus. Dior Rabbi Yochanan. Um, Continuing on about if people don't have money, you can leave Eretz Yisrael because Rabbi Yochanan says, "Nehirna kad havu kaimin arbas in besela." I remember when 4 would be sold for a sela, so prices were were reasonable, were cheap. But there were in Tiberia, there were a lot of people who had malnutrition, right? Because there was no money. V'yamar Rabbi Yochanan, Nihirna kadlo havu mitagrin poalaya lemidnach karta. I remember when workers wouldn't go to work in the east side of the city, mereach pita maisin, because they would die from because that's where they would bake the bread, and the people were hungry and they had to smell the bread being baked, and I guess they couldn't afford it or whatever, and they would die, so they wouldn't go to work that way in that part of town. I remember when if a child would split open a carob, v'hava nagid chuta dedusha al train darohe, and they would be so juicy that you'd tear open a carob and the juice would run over your arms.
Honey, honey, is that honey?
From
Duvsha.
a carob. Um, yeah, I guess, yeah, it literally means honey. Um, but it's, yeah, well, date honey is also called honey, right? So yes, it's like the fruit or the juice of the fruit. Grammar Lazar, Hava Natil Urva Bisra. I remember when a raven would grab a piece of meat and fly away with it. V'nagid chuta de mishcha v'reshura v'yad alara. And it was so juicy, the meat was so fatty that that would leave a lot of fat in its wake. Would flow from the top of the wall to the ground. That's how much he's exaggerating, clearly, but that's how good quality or how fat the herds were. I remember when a boy and a girl would walk in the marketplace. Kvarshis esrei ukvarshem esrei v'lo havu chatan, and they would be like 16 or 17 years old, and they would not sin together. This is more nostalgia for the ideal times. I remember when they were saying the base medrash, the modi lahon, if you would accept the other, meaning the of the are idolaters, nafil bidan, you'll fall prey to them. The misrachitz land you lay dilon, and if you put your trust in them, then uh, then whatever um, yeah, whatever is yours will become theirs. In other words, don't mix with the idolaters. Now back to Ruth. Ksiv, Machlon and Kilion. The names of the sons of Elimelech were Machlon and Kilion. Ksiv, but in Divrei Yamim it says Yoash v'Saraf. It says their names were Yoash and Saraf. So what is that? Rabbi Shmuel, Machlon v'Kilion Shema. Really, their names were Machlon and Kilion, V'lamanikor Shimon, Yoash, V'Saraf, and why were they also called Yoash and Saraf? Because Yoash and Yashu mean Yoash means is like related to use, like they gave up they gave up on Eretz Yisrael. Saraf Shenischayvu Sreifel Lamakom, and the other one was called Saraf because it was like he was Chayav Misa, right? He deserved to be burned. Of but the other one says Yoash v'Saraf Shimon. Their given names were Yoash and Saraf. V'lamanikra Shimon Machlon v'Kilion. Why were they called Machlon and Kilion and Rus? Machlon shasu gufan chulin. They made themselves profane. V'Kilion shenischayvu chloya lamakom, because they became deserving of destruction. Kilion means can be translated destruction before God. Tanya Kuman Amar the Machlon v'Kilion Shimon. Now we want to back up with these views. So one brisa teaches us that really their names were Machlon and Kilion. The Tanya Ma'dichsiv v'Yokim v'Yanshi Kozeva v'Yosh v'Saf Asher Ba'alu L'Moav v'Yushvi Lachem v'Yashuvi Lachem v'Advarim Atikim. This is the pasuk from Direi Yamim Yakim, and the people who dwelt in Koziva and Yosh and Saraf who took wives in Moab and Yashuvi Lechem. These are old stories. So V'yokim the Yeshua. So who are all these people? Yokim means Yeshua, Shehikim Shavua Lanshim Givon. He established this oath to the people of Givon. Remember, those are the ones that tried to trick him by appearing as if they came from a faraway place and wanted a peace treaty. And so Yeshua made a peace treaty with them. um, the Anshe Kozeva, Elu Anshe Givon, and the people in Kozeva, these are the people of Givon. Shekuz Kizvu B'Yoshua. Why are they called Kozeva? Because they lied to get this treaty. V'Yosh v'Saraf Elu Machlon v'Kilyan. Yosh and Saraf are really Machlon and Kilyan. V'Lama Nikra Shemon Yosh v'Saraf. Why were they called Yosh and Saraf? Yosh is Yashim Negula. Saraf Shnis Chayv Shreif El Makom, like we said before. Asher Baal Moav, who took wives from Rosh Nassau, Nashon Moavias. They married Ruth and Orpah. Via Shuvi Lachem, Zu Rusam Yashuvi Lechem, which you can translate returning for bread or returning to Beis Lechem. This is Ruth Shashava Venid B'Kav Beis Lechem Yehuda. She came back to Beis Lechem Yehuda. V'Hadvarim Atikim, and these are old stories. Dvarim Halalu Atik Yomaya Amran. That means the Atik Yomin, which is a name of a reference to God, the Ancient of Days, is were decreed to happen by God. Matzasi David Avdi, as it says, I found David my servant. To Lot, who was the progenitor of Moab, the angels say to him, "Take your two daughter, your wife, your daughters, your two daughters who are still here, who are with you." Um, so so the idea of matzasi, like I found, it's like predetermined, right? The word matzasi David Avi, I found David, and the word I found or found is also used with reference to his ancestors, the daughters of Lot. So anyway, this whole brisa indicates, part of this brisa indicates that the real names were Machla and Kilyon, and then they were later named Yoash and Saraf. Now the next pasuk in Divrei Yamim, Hema hayotzrim v'yoshvei netayim u'gedera im hamelech b'mlachto. They were the people who the artisans and people who lived by the tree, the planted trees and the fences with the king at his work. They sat there. Hema Yosrim, who are these artisans? Elu b'nei Yonadav ben Rechav, the sons of Yonadav ben Rechav, Shenotzru Shavuas Aviem, who guarded or kept the oath of their father. This is the character in Yirmiyahu, who they told Yirmiyahu that they had been told by their father, don't like plant any vineyards or drink any wine, but just live simply, because they foretold, or it was foretold to them, that the Beis Hamikdash would be destroyed. So like, don't invest in the land because you're going to be driven out of it. So Hayotzrim, it refers to not through Shuvasavim. They guarded the oath that they kept to their father, they made to their father. Yoshvei Netayim, and who are the people who live by the planted trees? Shlomo, that's King Shlomo Melech. Shadama Natia b'malchuso. He was like a well-rooted tree in his kingship. Ugadei Razu Sanhedrin. The fence is a reference to the Sanhedrin. Shagadru Pirsasein Shal Yisrael, who fixed the broken boundaries. In other words, they kept the Siag La Torah, make a boundary for the Torah. That was the job of the Sanhedrin, to keep people in line, as it were. Imam Melech b'Mlachto Yashusham, they sat with the king at his work. Zurus Hamoavia. This refers to Rus Sharasa ben Malchus Shlomo ben Beno Shal ben Bena, that she lived to see Shlomo take the reign of Israel. And Shlomo was her great grandson. Shanat Mar Vayasam Kisei LaEma Melech. as it says in Malachim, Shlomo placed a chair for the mother of the king. Doesn't mean his mother. It means Ima Shel Malchus, the mother of the whole line of royalty, which we understand to mean Ruth. So she, his great great grandmother, was at his coronation. Tanarabana, you'll eat from the old crop below salminton. This is part of the bracha that precedes the klala. If you listen to God, then you'll eat the old crop. Means below salmonton. It won't have this, I don't know, some kind of salmonton. What does it mean? My below salmonton. What does that mean? Gemara wants to know. Rav Nachman Amar, below ritzinta, free of this kind of infestation of worms. For Rav Sheshes Amar, below shadifa, free of this kind of decay. Some bacterial decay, I guess, which causes the crop to spoil. Tanya Kavasi Rav Sheshes, Tanya Kavasi Rav Nachman. We have a brisa supporting each of them. Tanya Kavasi Rav Nachman, V'chaltem Yashan, Yachol Yisrael Mitzapim L'Chadash Mipnei Yashan Shabal. I might think this means that you'll be you'll be looking forward to the new crop because the old crop is no good anymore. It's spoiled. Until the crop starts growing again. This is in the context of Shemitah, right? Shemitah and Yovel together. It's when do you look forward to the when do you need the new crop? You still have the old crop until the new crop comes in. Until, don't worry, you'll have plenty to eat. It won't rot until you get the new crop in. And so this refers to an infestation. Because it's not clear why this really supports the infestation interpretation. But Tanik Vasir Sheshis, the other one, that is some kind of a bacterial thing. So it's the verb shakala that is like has been destroyed. That is the term you would use for an infestation of worms. And this brisa says mipnei yashan shara because it goes bad. Okay, so minor points is that the two versions of this brisa, one supports Rav Sheshis that says the problem that you might if not for God's blessing, the problem you would have with grain is infestation, the other is rot. You'll eat old and even older produce. Teaches you that the older one is better, right? But that only applies to things that where that applies, right? Like wine, older wine is considered better. Older, I don't know, something else. There's certain things that age well, but what about things that applies to even the things that you don't age them? That's what the Torah is telling you, that everything will be good even when it's old. That says you'll clear out the old to make room for the new. In other words, you have storehouses full of last year's crop, and you have threshing floors with the new crop, and you got nowhere to put them because the silos are full. Where are we going to put the new crop? That's the problem you should have, right? That you're going to have to empty your silos of last year's crops so that you can store this year's crop. Everything that's aged is better. Except for dates. Old dates are not so good. Old beer is not so good, and these little fish when they age are not so good. I'm not sure what it's trying to get across with that, but it's the end of this parak, and tomorrow David will begin the sixth parak on 92, 92.
There
How
was
did it
a
go?
one.
Mm.
There was one Rashbam on the previous Amid where we were discussing the uh Boaz and Itzvan, and it was sick. He had 60 children. And then it says, "Well, I have one more," and that became ultimately David
I mean,
Melech.
yeah,
But
led
the
to David.
Rashbam mentions there, and I didn't. I looked at it, and I was look. He mentioned Shimshon. He says, "I remember there was a Shimshon," and I'm not sure I fully understood that, but it was a little bit odd that he meant that it seemed to be that Shimshon also came from him. Is that possible?
No, Shimshon came from Manoach, right?
I know.
Manoach demonstrated that, that um, let's see. Um,
Well, it was not. He didn't invite him because he said, "Why am I
because
going
at the
to
time he
invite?"
was childless and he thought this guy's never going to make any weddings.
Right.
It turns out he had Shimshon, and uh, but um, so yeah, the Shimshon thing is kind of incidental. The idea that the idea there is that he had these 60 children, and by implication, or the understanding of this brisa is that they all died. Um, or maybe they all died because of his behavior towards Manoah, right? But then he had another son, like keep trying because maybe you'll have one that will be successful. And indeed, that
But
led to
the
David HaMelech.
Rashbam says, right, he says, "V'hainu oved sha'olid Boaz merud v'yatza mimenu David melech Yisrael
Yeah.
ve'ika the patrile b'shimshon the zaris mishitin the ivtzan v'lo nehiri
Uh,
klal."
yeah. So some say the moral of the story is that like you had 60 children, you think you were so great, but Shimshon was the one that outshone them all. But then um but then what does that have to do with Boaz?
Yeah,
Like the whole point of this is to try and connect Ibsen and Boaz, right? But if the story is about because wait a second, because Ibsen's the one that had 60 children. Yeah, so what does Boaz have to do with it? So that's why the first one makes more sense to me.
what does Boaz have to do with? Oh,
Yeah, like the point of identifying Ibsen and Boaz would be that Ibsen had 60 children, right?
right,
And Boaz had one child, right? And compare them. And if they're the same person, then the moral is even if you had 60 children that amounted to nothing, keep going because you'll have one, maybe you'll have one that will amount to something. That only works if you identify Ibsen and Boaz as the same person.
right. Ve'ika the patri. What's
Yeah, the Econ Patria I don't understand because then what does that have to do with Ibsen and Boaz? Right? That has to do with Ibsan and Manoach, and Boaz doesn't enter into it.
right? The Boaz doesn't enter.
Boaz is the one that we know is the ancestor of David, but according to the Ika de Patre, it's comparing the 60 children who died with Shimshon. What does that have to do with David?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's why I don't understand that.
the Shimshon, the Zaris Meshitin the Ivtzan.
Right. But then
And
what does that have to do with Boaz?
uh yeah, I don't then he says Velo Nehira Cloud. It doesn't appear to
The-
me. Is that what he
yeah.
means?
Yeah, it doesn't it doesn't enlighten me at all, I guess, or it's not clear. It's not clear what this means because I think the problem is what I just said. Uh is that what does it have to do with Boaz?
Uh-huh. But it- well, what is the patri? The Ika the patri. What does that mean?
Explain. Leaf Torah is to
Oh, it's
solve a problem.
to solve, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so then it doesn't have anything that's right. Then it has anything then you can't put the two together, Boaz and Ivtzan.
right.
All right.
Okay. Have a good
Okay.
day, everybody.